Right, so apprenticeship reform, what you need to know. Today I will talk you through the Apprenticeship Levy, the new funding rules for England, and new standards in development. So let's start with the Apprenticeship Levy. From the 6th of April, a new tax on all companies, which is the Apprenticeship Levy, and it is 0.5% of payroll. Each company will get a £15,000 allowance, which means that only companies with a payroll greater than 3 million will have to pay the levy at this point in time. Note that connected companies will only receive one £15,000 allowance. Companies are connected if one company has control of another company, or both companies are under the control of the same person or persons. Where you need to pay the levy, it will be paid to the HMRC and should be included as part of your standard monthly return. Note also that whilst the levy applies to all nations, training is a devolved power, so we have UK-wide collection and a devolved allocation. Let's work through some examples. The first one, we have a company that has a payroll of £2 million. So 0.5% of 2 million is £10,000. You have an allowance of £15,000. So this means that no levy is due to be paid. The next example, we have a payroll of £4 million. 0.5% of 4 million is £20,000. So with an allowance of £15,000, this means that the company will end up paying £5,000 in levy. Final example, we have 3 connected companies, A, B and C, where they each have a pay bill of £500,000, 2 million and 3 million respectively. They have divided the allowance equally, so they've each been given a £5,000 levy allowance. So company A, 0.5% of the £500,000 is £2,500. They have an allowance of £5,000, so there is no levy to be paid. Company B, 0.5% of 2 million is £10,000. Deducting the allowance of £5,000 means that £5,000 in levy will be due to be paid. And company C, 0.5% of 3 million is 15,000. Deducting the allowance of 5,000 means that they will be due to pay £10,000 in levy. You will note that company A will not use all of their allowance. It is important that you consider how you will allocate your allowance, as once allocated, it is fixed for the year. There is a government site that will allow you to estimate your levy payments and to calculate your English fraction and plan your spending. The English fraction is the portion of your levy that you will have access to spend in England. The calculation is based on the home addresses, not the work addresses of your employees that are held by the HMRC. Now let's look at paying the levy. The levy will be calculated on a monthly basis and will have to be paid from the 6th of April 2017. Your annual pay bill is made up of all payments to employers that are subject to employer Class 1 secondary national insurance contributions. You are not allowed to carry over any unused allowance into the following tax year. If you start or stop being an employer partway through the year, you can use your full levy allowance against the amount of levy that you owe. And you will need to report how you have allocated your allowance the first time that you pay the levy. Moving on to the devolved nations. As I have said, the levy is UK-wide, but all other changes, so changes to funding rules, changes to standards, changes to apprenticeship structures, are all England only. The UK government has committed to the devolved nations their share of the levy money, and this is fixed for the next 3 years. These amounts are an increase on the amount of funding that the nations currently receive. Scotland and Ireland have issued consultation documents on how they should spend the money, and Scotland has published the outcomes from this consultation and have confirmed that they will increase the amount of money spent on apprenticeship training, but it will also spend some of the money on non-apprenticeship training and also on back-to-work schemes. Northern Ireland have not yet published the outcomes from their consultation. I think they have been too busy with elections. I'm not aware of any consultation or statement being issued by the Welsh Government. Unofficially, I've heard that whilst they have had an increase in funding for training, other social funds have been reduced so that overall there is no impact. So back to levy payers in England. The government has launched a new system called the Apprenticeship Service, which was previously known as the Digital Apprenticeship Service, or DAS. This system is for levy payers only and allows them to access and manage their account. When your levy payments, the portion relating to your England businesses, enters your account, the government will add a 10% uplift to them. And these funds are valid for 24 months. All transactions will be on a FIFO basis, so first in, first out. Connected companies can link their PAYE schemes, and this means that in the case of connected companies, you can spend funds in any company in the group, irrespective of which company paid the money in. The apprenticeship service will allow you to view and manage your funds, select providers, set agreed rates, add apprentices, and spend money on apprenticeship training. A point to note that whilst the amount in your digital account is the equivalent to what you are paid in levy payments, it is still public money. It is money collected by the government in taxation, and as such the apprenticeship service is allowing you to access a pot of public money. For this reason, the government, specifically actually the Skills Funding Agency or the SFA, will ask you to sign a contract prior to being allowed to access this money. I would suggest that the terms of this contract are not negotiable. However, I would recommend a legal and operational review, as you need to be aware of the terms that you are signing up to and the risks associated with non-compliance to the terms. To register on the new apprenticeship service, you will need 2 pieces of information: the government gateway login details for your PAYE schemes, and your payroll department should have this, and your organisation's company's house number or charity number, or the name of your public sector organisation if you are not a registered company or charity. Now, on to non-levy paying employers. This would also apply to levy paying employers who wish to spend more on apprenticeship training than they have available in their digital accounts. The government will pay 90% of the training costs, and so the employer only has to pay 10%. So in the case of an apprenticeship which costs £9,000, the employer will be required to pay £900 and the government will pay £8,100. Some additional payments which apply to all employers. Functional skills in English and maths will be funded by government directly to the training provider. Where an employer takes on an apprentice who is aged between 16 and 18, the government will pay £1,000 to the employer, and this will be paid in 2 instalments via the provider at 90 days and 365 days. Where an employer employs fewer than 50 people, in fact it is where an employer has employed on average 49 or fewer people in the 12 months prior to taking on an apprentice, and that apprentice is aged between 16 and 18, the government will pay for the training in full. So no employer contribution is required from non-levy payers and no deductions made from the digital account for levy payers. The existing apprenticeship grant for employers, which is commonly called the age grant, will continue as it is until July 2017. Now, the cost of apprenticeships. The government has published maximum funding bands for frameworks and for standards, and the government will only allow digital funds to be spent up to these maximum bands, and the government will only co-invest up to these maximum bands. The employer is responsible for agreeing the price with the provider, and any amount agreed which is over the maximum funding band will need to be paid for directly by the employer. For a provider to be able to deliver training, they must secure a place on the new register of approved training providers. The BPIF are on this new register, and this allows us and other approved providers to deliver training to levy-paying employers. In order to deliver training for non-levy-paying employers, interested providers had to respond to an invitation to tender issued by the SFA at the back end of last year. Decisions on this were due last week. However, this was not the case, and the government have not yet advised when they will publish the decision on who has been approved. Now, moving on to the new funding rules. These come into effect on the 1st of May 2017 and apply to all employers in England, irrespective of whether they are levy paying or non-levy paying. A draft of these new funding rules was published in October 2016, with final funding rules issued in February 2017. However, we have seen a revision published this month and may see further revisions to these before the 1st of May. It is worth noting that nothing changes for existing apprentices. So any apprentices signed up with a provider prior to the 30th of April 2017 will continue to be funded in the old way. No changes to the terms, no changes to the rules, and no changes to the standards. So let's look at what is changing. The new funding rules are a 34-page document, so I've just picked out some key points. Genuine job. The apprentice role must be a genuine job, and the expectation is that the apprentice will continue to work for the company after completion of the apprenticeship. The government have stated that they will monitor destination data for apprentices to ensure that there is no abuse in this area. Whilst there is no change to the eligibility of the learner to be funded, this is a reminder that the bar is higher than the rules around eligibility to work. 100% of training must take place during normal working hours, and 20% of the apprentice's working time must be spent on off-the-job training. Looking at this, up to now it has been that 20% of training had to be off the job. So this is a big step change. It is the responsibility of the employer to provide evidence on this, but it can include things like teaching of theory, so all workshops, things like shadowing, mentoring, researching, writing assignments can all be included. On the positive side, an apprenticeship can now be undertaken at a higher level, same level, or even at a lower level than a previously held qualification. So, for example, if you have a member of staff who has a degree in geography and you want to sign them up to a level 2 pre-press apprenticeship, this will now qualify for funding, as long as you can demonstrate that there is significant new learning and new skills. Under current rules, this was not allowed, and it does create an opportunity going forward. Surprisingly, 0-hour contracts are now allowed as long as all other criteria are met, and the term of the apprenticeship is extended based on actual hours worked. Again, as now, there is no upper age limit. The apprentice just has to be at least 16, but there's no upper limit on it. This slide I've added as a result of the government revision of the funding rules, and this seemed to be an area that they were focused on and were keen to highlight. The employer must not seek or accept from the provider any incentives or inducements or any other payment not authorised by the SFA in relation to any part of the apprenticeship programme. The employer must not seek or accept any refund in total or in part of your co-investment contribution. Contracts. There is not a lot to say here except that there are going to be lots of contracts. So the employer will be contracting with the government. The employer will need to have a contract with the provider. The employer will have a contract with the apprentice. There's going to be a tripartite agreement between the employer, the provider and the apprentice, and so on. I recommend, as you would expect, a legal review of any contract before you sign, and I would also suggest that you think about how you ensure that all of your contracts align. We're now getting near the end, so bear with me. New standards. The government referred to existing apprenticeship structures as frameworks and the new Trailblazer programs as standards. The key points to note around the new standards are firstly endpoint assessment. Existing frameworks are judged using continuous ongoing assessment. For the new standards, apprentices will be judged at an endpoint assessment, which depending on the apprenticeship programme may consist of exams, interviews, portfolios, practical demonstration, project and other assessment tools. They must be independent and therefore the employer and the provider are not part of the judgment. There is a register of approved assessment organisations. You as employers will choose the assessment organisation and agree the price with them, but it is the training provider who will contract with them and pay them. Another point to note is that endpoint assessments will be graded. It is worth noting that an apprenticeship is not in and of itself a qualification. Frameworks, as we have been familiar with, have always contained qualifications, so the NVQ and the VRQ or Tech Cert. There is no requirement for a qualification to be included in the new Trailblazer programs. The BPIF are launching the new Level 3 and Level 5 apprenticeship in management, which is based on the new Trailblazers. There are approved assessment organisations in place, and whilst not mandatory, the BPIF have decided to include the appropriate ILM, which is the Institute of Leadership and Management, VRQ within the programme. On the Trailblazer for print, an application for a print Trailblazer was made at the start of 2015 and was awarded in March 2015. A consortium of employers with James Buffoni of Rydale as the chair came together and worked to define the standard. This went out to industry for comment in September 2015. Adjustments were made and this was submitted to government for approval. It was approved, but this approval came with conditions, and these conditions were that there was to be one standard for print rather than the core with options of pre-press, printing and finishing that had been submitted. The consortium did not feel that this was something that they could accept and went back out to the industry to confirm this. We have had lots of feedback and in all cases confirming the consortium is right not to accept these conditions. Next month we will submit our case to the new Institute for Apprenticeships with the added weight of the support from the industry. So we're here to support you in training, but the BPIF also has many other services to offer. Feel free to visit our website to take a look.